Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It gets really a little nerve-wracking.
BC braces for what's called a bomb cyclone across our coast. Plus, stuck in the grass. A cargo plane overruns a landing at YVR, closing a runway for several days. And
we're not looking at who operates the businesses. What we're talking is about the actual type of business that it is.
why is the city of North Vancouver cracking down on currency exchanges?
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. It's time to batten down the hatches and charge your phones. Environment Canada is warning that most of Vancouver Island and the South Coast ought to brace for what's called a bomb cyclone. As Belle Puri explains, the storm is expected to bring hurricane-force gusts to some areas.
A fierce wind.
It gets really a little nerve-wracking because a lot of things blow away on us.
And high water. Precautions are in place to ease the impact of an elevated flood risk for Beach Grove and Boundary Bay.
I think everyone should be prepared as much as they can be.
The brunt of the storm is expected to hit the west coast of Vancouver Island the hardest.
Have you heard anything about tonight's cyclone bomb that's coming?
Oh my goodness, I don't know. It's another term like the atmospheric river that's just popping up. I don't know. To me, it just seems like another winter storm, but we'll see.
The wind is starting to pick up, and I think most people are going to be clearing out of here right away.
In some areas, there could be hurricane-force winds of over 118 kilometers per hour.
We're making sure that our sewage lift stations are operating properly. We're flood-proofing the property as best we can. Bomb cyclone is not a word we want to get used to hearing.
BC Hydro has already deployed crews to hard-to-reach places on Vancouver Island.
These crews will be working overnight and well into the evening to ensure that we have a full complement of crews to make sure that restoration and repair times are expedited.
The storm also spells trouble for BC ferries. Final round trips on several major routes were cancelled early in the day.
We're recommending that people be aware there's quite a strong risk of cancellation for the first round trip tomorrow mornings as well. Outside of that, there's no confirmed cancellations, but we are keeping a very close eye, and there's a very high risk that other sailings will be cancelled.
BC has already been hit by a series of powerful fall storms, but anyone living near coastal areas is advised to brace themselves for this one. Belle Puri, CBC News, Vancouver.
Darius Madavi joins us with the latest on the bomb cyclone. What's happening now?
Very high winds, Dan. So these are the wind gusts that we're seeing right now. I know this looks a little bit busy, but I think the one thing that stands out, there we go, 133 kilometers per hour gusting right now. If we take a look at our max gusts that we've seen throughout the day today, we can zoom in here. Port Hardy seeing 93 kilometers per hour. If we come down here, even the South Island areas around Victoria, just on the South Island, seeing 78, 91 kilometers per hour. Keep in mind, Vancouver not expected to see the worst of the winds. The windstorm will mostly be focused on the island, but including the east coast of the island, the Sunshine Coast, Central Coast, and then as well the North Coast, especially later in the day and into tomorrow. If you see, we have wind warnings blanketing up and down the coast, and then special weather statements throughout the interior, also warning of high winds, but especially in the interior, that high snowfall accumulation coming to the mountain passes, 10 to 20 centimeters over the next few days on the sea to sky because, again, of this bomb cyclone, such a deep low, really generating those high winds and that snowfall, that precipitation. Also expecting to see anywhere from 10 to 25 centimeters on the sea to sky highway. You can see that here, all that moisture coming in. So, Dan, buckle up for a busy time.
Okay, thanks very much, Darius.
Thank you.
And a reminder for you for the latest vital information, consider visiting CBC Lite. This is our low bandwidth version of our website. It's perfect for when you're short on power or need to save your data. Go to cbc.ca/LITE, cbc.ca/lite. Passengers heading to and from Vancouver International Airport are asked to check their flight status after a close call early Tuesday morning forced one runway to be temporarily closed. That's because a Prime Air cargo plane overran a landing, skidding off the end of the north runway after it had told the control tower it needed to make an emergency landing. No one was hurt and 3 crew members were safely brought out. YVR officials say it will take a few days, if not longer, to pull that plane out of the grass. They'll unload the cargo in the meantime. They say that all flights on Tuesday were moved to the south runway, with only about 5% of flights experiencing any kind of delay. BC's new health minister, Josie Osborne, has a big job ahead. She's trying to stop persistent emergency department closures that have plagued rural and remote communities, among many other things. Katie DeRosa has more on the expectations for BC's costliest ministry.
Josie Osborne says a top priority as health minister is improving access to care for people in rural BC. She plans to draw on her past experience as Tofino's mayor.
You know, I've lived in Tofino now for over 25 years, and I've seen a lot of the struggles that people face, accessing specialist care, needing to travel, the cost and time that it takes to travel.
Osborne remembers how her community stepped up in 2015 when the Leviathan whale-watching ship capsized off Tofino's coast, killing 6 people.
When I saw what our healthcare professionals and emergency responders did together, how our community came together, dealing with a small facility, the Tofino General Hospital, where people literally opened up their homes in order to help care for people that had been impacted by that terrible tragedy.
Current Tofino Mayor Dan Law is a former healthcare employee and worked with Osborne on council for a year in 2019.
She's a small town gal who knows what it's like to live in a remote rural community and what that means for healthcare. This is going to be great. It's going to be great for a lot of rural towns, a lot of small towns.
Green Party leader Sonia Furstenau is hopeful that Osborne can improve access to primary care and address ER closures.
Josie comes from a community that is underserved when it comes to healthcare. So Josie will understand why we need to look at making primary care more available, more reliable.
Former BC Liberal Health Minister Terry Lake says Osborne is a solid choice.
When people ask me who I thought might be the next minister, I often would say Josie Osborne would be a good candidate. So I'm happy to see her there.
Osborne will also take over the mental health and addictions file, which is being folded back into her ministry. Conservative MLA Eleanor Sturcall has accused the mental health ministry of being, quote, hijacked by radical ideology, pointing to the failed experiment with drug decriminalization. And Garth Mullins with the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users says the now former ministry was largely ineffective since it lacked a budget or any policy-making power. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
The BC Parks Foundation and the Katzie First Nation say water is once again flowing at the Red Slough on the Pitt River, one of the largest salmon restoration efforts in Western Canada.
It's all for the generations to come in hopes that they will be able to at least see the salmon come home again. We're here, we're not going anywhere. You're here, you're not going anywhere. It's our salmon, and it's for all of us.
The Red Slough had been severed from its natural course over a century ago, resulting in stagnant iron-rich water that led to fish dying. Burnaby City Council says it's going to look at an alternative to a rapid bus lane along Hastings Street. Some businesses have lamented the loss of customer parking if the project went ahead. But a transit users group argues it's needed as more people move in. Now, as Mira Baines explains, there's a compromise.
The future of a proposed rapid bus route in Burnaby has been at the center of a contentious debate. TransLink and city staff had been recommending the city restrict curbside lanes on Hastings for only buses between Willingdon and Duthie Avenues. The rapid bus route would be dedicated 7 days a week from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. The plan was a no-go for local businesses concerned over the loss of parking spots over 10 blocks.
Once you ixnay all the parking, you've hampered your seniors, you've hampered your people with children, you've hampered people with mobility difficulty, and so on and so forth.
After significant pushback, City Council decided not to move ahead at Monday night's council meeting. Instead, city staff will be looking into creating bus bulbs, which allow for a bus-only lane and street parking through the business area. Bus bulbs are an extension of the sidewalk that align the bus stop with the parking lane. This advocate for transit riders who have faced delays through the stretch says the revised plan is reasonable.
We're still happy that we're going to get a big stretch of bus lane on what is the most congested corridor in the region. We also heard councillors say that they want to do more. They want to do stuff on other corridors that aren't necessarily going to affect businesses as much.
But even before those bus bulbs go ahead, city staff is being tasked with community engagement. Some members of the business community are urging for more input.
So very pleased about the amendment to consult all those affected.
The city plans to begin designing the new configurations with hopes of implementing them by 2026. Mira Baines, CBC News, Burnaby.
A fire in Burnaby in the early morning hours of Tuesday has gutted a low-rise condo complex. The blaze happened at a residential building near Jersey Avenue in Kingsway just after midnight. CBC News has reached out to the Burnaby Fire Department to try to get more details on what happened. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency has issued a recall of some organic carrots, citing a risk of E. coli. This after a similar recall in the U.S., where one person has died and dozens more have fallen ill. As Pinky Wong tells us, no cases have been identified in Canada so far.
If you brought carrots in the past few months, check your fridge. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency is issuing a recall linked to several brands of organic bag carrots and baby carrots. A similar recall was issued in the States on Sunday, where one person died and dozens have fallen ill from E. coli infections. The carrots are distributed by California-based Greenway Farms. The CFIA says it's working closely with U.S. authorities and is monitoring the situation here in Canada. Health Canada says as of Monday, they hadn't identified any cases regarding the recalled products in Canada. The recalled brands include Bunny Love, President's Choice, and Compliments, among others. They're sold at Sobeys, Whole Foods, and Loblaw stores. The best if used by dates for the whole carrots range from August 14 through October 23rd. For baby carrots, it's from September 11 through November 12. Sobeys says the affected products are no longer in the supply chain or in any of their stores. Whole Foods Canada says customers can request a refund with the receipt. Health Canada said symptoms of E. coli infection include nausea, headache, severe stomach cramps, and diarrhea. Consumers are advised to not eat the products, and those experiencing symptoms should seek medical attention. Pinky Wong, CBC News, Vancouver.
Vancouver Canucks forward JT Miller is taking an indefinite leave of absence from the team for what's being called personal reasons. The announcement comes hours before the Canucks are set to face off against the New York Rangers. General Manager Patrick Alvin says the entire squad is there to support him. Miller has 16 points in 17 games so far this season and scored a career-high 103 points in 2023-2024.
It's a significant blow to this hockey club. Of course, everybody's more concerned about JT Miller, the person, than the player right now. But the show does go on, and the Vancouver Canucks have to push on in his absence. And when he's at the top of his game, he means so much to this club. He does so much for the Vancouver Canucks. So this is a massive hole that they're going to have to try to fill internally.
The Canucks are already playing without some of their key players like Thatcher Demko, Brock Besser, and Derek Forbert, all suffering from injuries. Connor Garland is awaiting the birth of his first child, and Dakota Joshua has been diagnosed with testicular cancer, but he is on the active roster. Canada's inflation rate jumped last month. An increase was expected, but the October number was even larger than forecast. StatsCan says inflation rose to 2% last month, up from 1.6% in September. The price of gas, groceries, and rent were the main factors. The increase is not expected to halt the Bank of Canada's interest rate reductions, though it could see the bank slow down the pace of those cuts. The central bank's next setting is scheduled for December 11th. Coming up, if you've spent any time in North Vancouver, you may have noticed the large number of currency exchange businesses in the area. After the break, we'll bring you a look at why that's led to a new bylaw. Stick around.
I'm Stephen Quinn, and I love living here in Vancouver, BC.
It's a city with world-renowned beauty, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows. In our new daily podcast, This is Vancouver, we're exploring the diverse range of issues and stories in this city, the good, the bad, and everything in between, as told by the people who live it every day. Don't miss This is Vancouver, available wherever you get your podcasts, and I'll talk to you soon.
Let's spread some joy. Kick off the holiday season with a day of special programming in support of local food banks across BC. Make the season kind. December 6th. The Salvation Army has kicked off its donation drive with an ambitious collection target for this holiday season.
And we're here in Robson Square with a $4.5 million goal. So we need everyone's help to reach that goal. And we appreciate everyone coming out today to help us kick off the Christmas season.
The charity says donations are essential for providing food and warm clothing to hundreds of Lower Mainland families. It says it's seen a surge in people, including children, visiting its food banks because of the cost of living crisis. The charity is asking donors to make donations online if they can't mail checks because of the Canada Post strike. And charity car ride service Operation Red Nose will no longer be running this year in the Tri-Cities, Burnaby, and in New Westminster. They say they've had a disappointing run last year.
We just weren't getting the calls, and last year was even worse. Last year, the phones would just stop ringing at 1 o'clock at night, so we weren't getting the calls until 3 o'clock in the morning, like we used to. And so we needed to make a decision.
Wancombe says people are now relying more on services like Uber and Lyft, and restaurants and bars are not open as late as night as they used to be, some of them. She says Operation Red Nose made just under $6,000 last year as compared to $18,000 pre-COVID in its campaign. This year, the service is only running in Chilliwack and Abbotsford. In North Vancouver, an abundance of currency exchange businesses has led to a new bylaw. The CBC's Rafferty Baker looks into why the stores are flourishing in the city and why councillors are now limiting where they can do business.
If you've spent much time in the central Lonsdale area, you've seen them. Currency exchanges. There are more than 24 in the city of North Vancouver alone. A fact not lost on people online.
I love exchanges. I love the currencies. I love exchanges.
In West Vancouver, councillors were concerned enough that they introduced a rule that limits how many currency exchanges can be on any given block, along with other businesses. Now, the city of North Vancouver has singled out currency exchanges, or money service businesses, banning new ones from setting up at street level. But why are there so many here? There are two main factors. First, the area is home to a large Persian community. Second, international sanctions make sending money to and from Iran more complicated than other countries. It started almost 20 years ago with concerns about Iran's nuclear program. By 2011, Canada had introduced sanctions cutting off Iran's financial institutions. People can still send and receive money, but it's closely regulated. The businesses doing the transfers need to follow steps to make sure there isn't money laundering, and the transfers aren't tied to nuclear weapons development or terrorism. It all goes through Canada's Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre, or FinTrack. We spoke to a couple of business owners who say that a big part of their job is paperwork. Sure, these businesses will exchange certain currencies, but their bread and butter is sending money to and from Iran. So why did North Van City Council decide to impose new limits?
They have sort of what we might call dead space in their windows. They're not the kind of things that attract pedestrians to want to go in and shop, to have an active zone. And so we're saying they are part of the makeup that needs to serve the community, but it's where should they be? If we want to have a walkable community, if we want to have that vibrancy, we don't want them on the ground level on the main areas.
Don Bell says this wasn't meant to target a specific community.
But we're not looking at who operates the businesses. What we're talking is about the actual type of business that it is, and how, whether that goes against the goal of animating the street. So it's really got nothing to do who operates it.
However, unlike West Vancouver, the City of North Vancouver bylaw only applies to money service businesses, mostly run by Iranian Canadians and serving that community. So don't expect any new money exchanges to be set up on the street here. Rafferty Baker, CBC News, North Vancouver.
A look at the day that was in White Rock with the pier lit up. Saw lows of 4 and highs of 4. Darius Madavi will be back with a look at what we can expect over the coming days as we keep our eyes on that bomb cyclone hitting the BC coast. Stick around. We are into the second and final week of the COP29 summit, and all this week we'll be taking a look at the talks and how British Columbians are working to combat the climate crisis here at home. There is still no breakthrough at those discussions in Baku, however. Negotiators are trying to work out how much money rich nations must provide to poorer ones to cope with climate change. As Susan Ormiston explains, less attention is being paid to ways to cut harmful emissions.
Tax billionaires, polluters, and fix the climate, a protest in Brazil for G20 leaders meeting there, who didn't copy that in their final communique, but did send a message to the United Nations Climate Conference in Azerbaijan. In short, get the climate finance deal done this week.
We now need to translate political will into practical work.
A boost for flagging talks, maybe. But an obvious omission, say analysts, was no mention of fossil fuels. None.
As the world's biggest economies and biggest emitters, their statement of walking away from fossil fuel would have made a huge wind in the sail for these negotiations here.
Especially after last year's COP in Dubai.
It is so decided.
Where they agreed to transition away from fossil fuels. Some parties want that intention underscored here. So far, it's not.
There is a lack of recognition that transitioning away from fossil fuels is part of the solution, and this is worrying.
With the COP talks reaching a critical stage.
The talks are very slow. And the reason it's slow is that no country has made a real offer on the table.
Watching and waiting, those who are advocating for help. Edith Nasika Santian knows too well what drought looks like.
In between the year 2020, 2023, we lost around 4.5 million livestock within the Maasai communities. That is a source of livelihoods for the Maasai community. And so when these livestock are actually gone, what happens? The entire community becomes so devastated. The women in the Indigenous communities are the ones that take responsibility.
This is Edith's second UN climate conference, and this time she wants to return home with a promise of financial support to help especially young women adapt to the future. But countries are still at loggerheads over who and how to pay up. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Baku.
For the third year in a row, the First Nations Climate Initiative is part of Canada's official delegation to the talks. It's a group made up of 4 First Nations here in BC, the Haisla, the Metlakatla, Nisga'a, and Halfway River First Nations. Joining us to talk more about First Nations involvement in COP and their effort to combat climate change is Candace Wilson, the Environment Manager with the Haisla Nation. Candace, thanks for joining us. First of all, what is the First Nations Climate Initiative hoping to achieve at COP29?
With it being our third year returning to present at COP29, we just hope to update the delegation on the work that we've completed in the last year.
And how busy have you been?
Very busy.
Yeah.
There's a long list of stuff that FNCI has been working on. Mostly for us, it's nature-based solutions, as well as getting the renewable energy infrastructure project off the ground. And we're also looking into some methane pyrolysis pilot projects, just to name a few.
So before we get into the projects that you're working on, how are you seeing the climate crisis play out in your community specifically?
With our community, it's dealing with the major weather events. So there's potential for our roads to wash out. We have sea level rise because we're right next to the Douglas Channel. So if there's ever a washout of our road, we will have limited access to resources in town.
Now, your area of expertise is nature solutions, I understand it, within the Haisla Nations. What do those solutions look like to you and the nation?
So for the Haisla, we've been prioritizing riparian restoration projects, which help mitigate the impacts from historical forestry impacts back in the 70s. So that's our main goal. Other nations, because we work with them so closely, Halfway River First Nations is about to kick off their nature-based solutions, which will essentially go as a carbon sink, but it also goes with our traditions and culture, where we restore the ecosystems that we rely on.
Now, that's on a local level, and what role would you like to see First Nations play at a national level when it comes to Canada's efforts to combat the climate crisis?
Really, it's just Indigenous led. So if all the nations in Canada were to look at nature-based solutions, those would go towards carbon sink, as well as having a global impact in terms of helping the climate with these types of projects.
You mentioned projects earlier that you're working on. The Haisla First Nation signed off earlier this year on the Cedar LNG plant to operate in your territory in Kitimat. How do you balance out the economic opportunities that will come with that, along with potential environmental impacts of the plant?
So with FNCI, we've been working on a research project that will delve into the Canada-Asia decarbonization opportunities, and that's where the Cedar LNG project will come into play, is that global aspect of minimizing the low carbon, having low carbon energy resources that other nationalities can access.
Candace Wilson, we appreciate your time and your perspective. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
A human smuggler who had been ordered to surrender his passport was issued a new one by the federal government. The man had pleaded guilty and was under house arrest awaiting sentencing. He was then linked to a failed attempt to smuggle people into the U.S., which left 2 families dead. It was during that investigation last year the new passport was found. More now from the CBC's Jorge Barrera.
I have a hope I will get some kind of refugee application process is easy again in this country.
A Sri Lankan man weeps in this interrogation video following a failed attempt to smuggle him into Canada in April 2021. Detective Sergeant Matthew Amer, with a multi-agency border task force, sits across the table.
My role here is to investigate the criminality involving people smuggling him across the border as a victim.
I don't know the process in this country.
The man was sent back to the U.S., but this was the beginning of Amer's dealings with Thesson Garrison Rasaya, who was convicted of arranging this 2021 smuggling run.
I was part of the takedown team that day.
It began with a tip from U.S. Border Patrol and ended in this Cornwall, Ontario parking lot. Police watched as Rasaya pulled in to pick up the Sri Lankan national who had just been smuggled into Canada.
So they were boxed in and guns were drawn until we established that everything was safe, took everybody into custody.
Rasaya was charged and ordered to surrender his passport and remain at home under strict conditions, monitored by ankle bracelet to await trial. But that didn't stop him.
He was still operating even though he was on release.
He was then allegedly linked to the fatal U.S.-bound human smuggling run in March 2023 that ended with the death of 2 families who drowned with their boatmen in stormy weather on the St. Lawrence River. When police raided Rasaya's Montreal home in 2023 after the deaths, they found this.
He had obtained a new passport.
Probably one of the worst failures I've seen in 9 years now.
Tom Kimmich, the conservative immigration critic, says he wants a parliamentary committee to examine how Rasaya got a new passport while under court-imposed conditions, barring him from having one.
And how bad is our national security infrastructure when we can't catch the most basic things in our system?
Immigration Canada said privacy laws prevented them from commenting on Rasaya's case. The RCMP refused comment. Jorge Barrera, CBC News, Ottawa.
The mental health of Canadians is under stress. A report released today says Canadians' mental health is 3 times worse than it was before the pandemic. And as Mike Crawley explains, the report also says funding and access to care is not keeping pace.
This report card comes from the Canadian Mental Health Association, and it provides data on a couple of dozen measures, including the prevalence of mental illness, how much access we all have to mental health care, and how much is being spent in the sector. 7.8% of Canadians have a need for mental health care that is not being met. Now that's roughly 1 in 12 of us, or about 2.5 million people. And then on spending, well, the provinces put on average a little more than 6% of their healthcare budgets into mental health, addictions, and substance use, and that is roughly half what is spent in such countries as France and Germany. Now, what does this all add up to? Well, the report card says it means that people face paying out of pocket for mental health services like psychological counseling, or they face really long wait times trying to get access to services if they're provided through the public public system. Now, the lead author of this report also says there are significant disparities in the care that's available in different parts of the country.
We want to see governments work together and collaborate when it comes to mental health and addictions. And that also means making it part of the universal healthcare system. It will be really difficult to make those changes to improve population health if we can't make this care universal.
This CMHA report card is critical of the federal government for not implementing the mental health strategy that was drawn up a decade ago. And it says that Ottawa needs not only to increase mental health funding, but also to attach strings so that the provinces are forced to provide more mental health services through the public system. Mike Crawley, CBC News, Toronto.
A shelter for victims of intimate partner violence is opening in Calgary. But as Aaron Collins shows us, this one is different. It's for men, and it's one of just 2 in this country.
Volunteers put the finishing touches on a unique shelter in Calgary, the city's first housing for men who've been victims of domestic violence.
So this facility is really designed to be a place where men can come with their children.
A growing need. Rates of intimate partner violence against men and boys up 20% between 2018 and 2023.
Are people surprised when they learn that a facility like this is even needed?
Absolutely. Most Canadians don't realize that 1 in 6 incidents of intimate partner violence are against men, and they have no place to take their children and other extended family members where they can stay together as a family.
This facility just the second of its kind in Canada. The first opened in Toronto in 2021.
I just needed somewhere to go, and I was looking online and I couldn't really find any shelters for men.
A sanctuary for men escaping violent relationships.
It was a situation where it was like I had to go with my kids, right? So it was just, I couldn't leave her with the kids with them, so I was able to take my kids to go.
That Toronto shelter has a constant waiting list. The lack of space, just one obstacle facing men looking for help.
Many barriers, and it's not only embarrassment and shame, and also looking unmanly. It's also just because men do not believe that the help is available to them.
Back at the Calgary shelter, hope that that reality is shifting.
We need to have a different attitude towards men's mental wellness and make sure we have the supports and services in place to support every man.
A change being made here, one bed at a time. Aaron Collins, CBC News, Calgary.
Coming up, the G20 Summit is coming to a close in Rio de Janeiro. During that high-level meeting, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reinforced Canada's support for Ukraine and spoke about concerns about Donald Trump returning to the White House. That story's next. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has chosen Howard Lutnick to lead the Commerce Department. He's currently head of a financial services firm, and Trump says he will lead his tariff and trade agenda. Meanwhile, a pick by Trump last week continues to capture headlines. Chris Reyes reports from New York.
Matt Gaetz resigned from Congress last week after being tapped by President-elect Donald Trump for Attorney General. His resignation put a stop to a vote that could have released a report from a congressional committee looking into allegations of sexual misconduct, illicit drug use, and improper gifts against Gaetz. Now, a lawyer is sharing his client's closed-door testimony given to Congress.
The testimony before the House was yes, that Representative Gaetz paid my client, both of my clients, for sexual favors throughout the summer of 2017 all the way to the beginning of 2019.
Joel Leopard also said that his client witnessed Gaetz having sex with a minor.
She arrived at the party. She had sex with Representative Gaetz within minutes of her arrival. Later on, when she was walking out to the pool area, she observed to her right Representative Gaetz having sex with her friend, who was 17 at the time.
Gaetz has denied all allegations against him, including having sex with a minor. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have called on Congress to release the report on Gaetz, despite his resignation.
I think that if they want a speedy consideration of this nomination, we've got to have as much transparency as we can have.
I think the Senate should have a chance to take a look at any evidence they think is relevant to the decision they have to make.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson says releasing a report on Gaetz, who is now effectively a private citizen, would set a bad precedent.
I would be concerned about opening the Pandora's box and saying that the House Ethics Committee, with its vast resources and unlimited power, effectively, could investigate private citizens and release reports about them.
Senate confirmation hearings for Trump's nominees are slated to begin next year, soon after he officially moves into the White House in January. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
The two-day G20 Summit is winding down in Rio de Janeiro. During his closing news conference, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau talked about Canada's support for Ukraine in its war against Russia. And he talked about concerns about Donald Trump's return to the White House. The CBC's Evan Dyer has the latest.
Just days after President Joe Biden gave Ukraine the green light to use American missiles to attack Russian territory, Moscow angrily denounced 6 strikes on its Bryansk region. In Rio, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said he backed Biden's decision.
Because Ukraine hasn't been able to strike on factories and military production sites in Russia, we have called for that for a while.
Although President-elect Donald Trump has made it clear he'll try to force Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky to the negotiating table, Trudeau says Canada isn't ready to give up on Ukraine's goal of victory. He's been meeting here with other allies who feel the same way.
We're very aware of potential challenges with President Trump coming in, but we're not going to panic. We're going to continue to stay focused on getting the support to Ukraine.
But Trudeau has conceded that all the other Western allies together don't have enough heavy weapons systems to fill the gap that will be left if the U.S. abandons Ukraine. Another major area of disagreement between Trump and most other world leaders is on climate change. Yesterday, Trump nominated Chris Wright to be his energy secretary, a fracking executive who says there is no climate crisis. Trudeau says it's partly Canada's green energy and infrastructure projects that have made it the country that gets the most foreign investment per capita of all 20 countries represented at this summit.
If Mr. Trump doesn't want to take on the opportunities associated with climate change, Canada will continue to.
Countries are meeting this week at the COP29 summit in Azerbaijan, where they have till Friday to thrash out a deal whereby rich countries will compensate poorer ones for the sacrifices they're being asked to make to fight climate change. Most wealthy countries, including the U.S. under Joe Biden, have agreed that if poorer countries are being asked to forego the cheap and dirty fossil-fueled growth that already helped the West grow rich, they should be given something in return. But few expect Trump to honor any commitment made by a lame duck Biden administration. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Rio de Janeiro.
Now, as Evan mentioned, Ukraine began firing American-supplied longer-range missiles into Russia today. It's the first time Kyiv has used those weapons since Russia's full-scale invasion exactly 1,000 days ago. Crystal Gumansing has more.
1,000 days into Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, world leaders are highlighting the courage and resilience of Ukrainians in the face of Russian aggression. But it's a military move by Ukraine that's getting a lot of attention and being called an escalation by Russia. The Kremlin's defense ministry says 6 long-range U.S. ATACMS missiles were fired by Ukraine at the Bryansk region. American media, including the Washington Post, cite media sources saying U.S.-donated ATACMS were used in that strike. Now, approval for those missiles to be used on targets inside of Russian territory was just granted on Sunday. When asked, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky did not say if ATACMS were used. Instead, he said that Ukraine also has Neptune long-range missiles that were developed locally and that Ukraine will use anything at its disposal. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin formally lowered the threshold for using nuclear weapons, opening the door to a potential nuclear response by Moscow, even to a conventional attack by any nation supported by a nuclear power. For example, Ukraine, backed by the U.S. Zelensky is encouraging supporters to act and not be afraid, saying his country wants peace. Russia does not.
They presented nuclear weapons strategy. Why? They didn't present peace strategy. Did you hear it? Did you read about it? No, of course, nuclear weapons strategy. Because he wants just to make chaos in the world.
Now, this was not the first Russian nuclear threat, but it was met with strong condemnation from Europe's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell.
To call for the nuclear, to talk about nuclear deterrence at that moment is something that we strongly reject. We condemn any reference to the use of nuclear arms.
Zelensky told the Ukrainian parliament that the war can be won with support and said resilience is needed. Crystal Gumansing, CBC News, London.
Dozens of prominent pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong are going to prison after being prosecuted under the territory's sweeping national security law, which was imposed by Beijing. This was the scene earlier today outside the courthouse in Hong Kong. The harshest sentence is 10 years in prison for the alleged leader of the group. This is being described as the city's biggest national security case to date. The global community has condemned the sentencings, many countries expressing concern about freedom of speech and political dissent. Darius Madavi is here with our BC-wide weather forecast, checking in on some very fast-moving wind.
Yes, that's right. Look at that update, Dan. 143 kilometers per hour. These are gusts, not consistent winds, but the consistent winds are very, very high, too. This is what we were talking about when we were talking about possible hurricane-force winds coming to Vancouver Island and other parts of the coast. And you can see here, even the South Island, seeing winds over 100 kilometers per hour in some places. Even in the Strait, we're seeing winds up to 94 kilometers per hour. We're talking about some very widespread impacts that could be coming. So we have wind warnings up and down the coast, special weather statements in the interior as well. If we zoom out here, you can watch that cyclone pushing all that moisture, all that water vapor into the province. That's why we're going to see so much snow come down in many of these places, including Mount Washington, expected to get 1 meter of snow over the next few days. Many of the lower mainland mountains, the local mountains, as well as up the Sea to Sky, Whistler, going to get very good dumps as well, 20 to 40 centimeters, especially up in Whistler. You can see that bomb cyclone there, that really clear center of that storm as it continues to develop. And if we overlay here, or underlay, I suppose, this is the wave heights that we're expecting to see in many of these places. And you can see that center there, 9 meters. And actually, I think we have an update. That there in the middle is about 10 meters there as well. I think I just put that in the wrong spot. But very high waves as well. Those are approaching the coast, so expect to see waves start to pick up along the west coast of Vancouver Island. Will also be quite high in here as well. You can see in our wind forecast, even parts of the west coast of the island getting up to 100 kilometers per hour pretty soon. And again, it's a very widespread wind event, which is part of the problem, but also very long lasting. Usually a wind event like this might last 6 to 10 hours. This one going to last anywhere from 12 to 20 hours across parts of the coast. And that's part of why we're expecting to see such widespread outages, which we're already seeing. At least tens of thousands of people without power already across BC. We've seen trees come down, really, really widespread impacts already. And we're only going to continue to see that, especially as that low moves up north. And we'll see it affect more places like the Central Coast as well. You can see that wind continuing to pick up and really lasting into Wednesday night in many places. There's also going to be an atmospheric river, fortunately, heading south of us into California and Oregon, but that's very long lasting too. That's going to last through Friday, starting today and lasting through Friday. And that's why we're seeing such widespread, or not that's why, but we're also seeing widespread precipitation up here in BC as well. So Dan, as we get into tomorrow, expect gusty winds up and down the coast. Expect some snow to start in the interior. Those mountain passes getting about 10 to 20 centimeters of snow. In terms of a 5-day forecast here in Vancouver, lots of activity, even still. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Darius.
Unfortunately, not as much wind here, I should say.
Also good. Hope everyone stays safe. Thanks, Darius.
Thank you.
Still to come, we'll tell you about one Greek man whose work is being added to UNESCO's list of intangible cultural heritage. You'll want to see this. A Greek man who uses ancient techniques to create pottery has received a big honor. His work is being added to UNESCO's lists of intangible cultural heritage.
His pottery is rare because he produces the clay from local soil and uses a traditional kiln, which uses olive pits as fuel. He also paints with natural lime.
It's a lot of pots. A mechanized press can work at 10 times the speed of an individual potter. UNESCO's intangible list includes customs most at risk of disappearing and is designed to protect traditions that are passed from one generation to another. Busy fellow. Good for him.
Honestly, mechanical press only being, what was it, 5 times faster, 10 times faster?
Yeah.
I would have thought it'd be more. That's a fast potter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, impressive.
He's got practice.
Fair enough. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, as well as on YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
And we'll have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National, with all the latest, the bomb cyclone off our coast. We'll see you then. Good night.